says the woman who performed surgery the morning of our wedding. It was an emergency. It's always an emergency with you. That's one of the things I love about you. As they sat there, watching the city lights twinkle, Maya thought about their journey. The mistaken blind date, the viral photos, the scandal, the separation, and the growth that led them back to each other. You know what Eleanor told me, she said. She said sometimes love isn't about finding the perfect person, it's about finding someone who's willing to become better with you. James kissed her softly. Smart woman Eleanor. Think she'll come out of retirement to make more matches. She says we were her masterpiece, going out on a high note. Later that night, as they danced at their reception, surrounded by people who had become family, by blood, by choice, by circumstance, they realized that their story wasn't just about love. It was about growth, about challenging prejudices, about becoming better people together. And somewhere in the city, Elena Jung raised a glass to her last and greatest match, knowing that sometimes the best love stories aren't about perfect beginnings, but about perfect timing, growth, and the courage to try again. The end. Their second first date happened on a busy Friday evening at a tiny Thai restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Maya arrived first, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, no pretenses this time. James showed up in a casual button-down, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. No paparazzi this time, he said with a smile, sliding into the plastic chair across from her. I checked. The restaurant was cramped, noisy, and perfect. They'd ordered far too much food, sharing stories about the past 3 months between bites of pad thai and green curry. Remember that little girl in the hospital? Maya asked, reaching for another spring roll. The one who noticed I was sad. She's doing amazing now. Actually, she's the one who convinced me to answer your dinner invitation. James raised an eyebrow. Oh? How did a 6-year-old manage that? She said, Dr. Thompson, sometimes when you break a bone, it grows back stronger. Pretty wise for a kid who believes in unicorns. As they talked, both realized how much they'd grown during their time apart. James had transformed his company culture, creating mentorship programs for minority students in tech. Maya had started a support group for young doctors dealing with workplace discrimination. I have something to show you, James said, pulling out his phone. He showed her a video of his mother teaching a cooking class at a community center. She's been volunteering there, teaching traditional Chinese recipes to anyone who wants to learn. Says it's her way of building bridges. Maya smiled, remembering how disapproving his mother had been initially. People can surprise you. Speaking of surprises, James said, Elena Jung is retiring from matchmaking. She says we were her masterpiece even when we were apart. Their conversation was interrupted by the restaurant owner, an elderly Thai woman who kept bringing them extra dishes on the house. She reminded them both of their grandmothers, wise, caring, and completely unable to stop feeding people. As they walked through the city after dinner, Maya stopped at a street corner. This feels different, she said. Better. James took her hand, and it felt natural, like coming home. Because we're different. Better. 2 months later, they made their first public appearance together at a hospital fundraiser. This time, there were no scandal-seeking reporters, no whispered judgments. Instead, people were interested in their joint initiative, a program combining medical technology and accessible healthcare. Their wedding, when it happened 6 months later, wasn't the elaborate society event everyone expected. They held it in the hospital's rooftop garden, where many of Maya's young patients could attend. James's mother made traditional Chinese dishes, served alongside Nigerian specialties prepared by Maya's family. Elena Zhang sat in the front row, beaming like a proud parent. The little girl who'd noticed Maya's sad eyes was the flower girl, spreading rose petals and joy in equal measure. During their vows, James spoke about learning and growth. Sometimes you have to lose something precious to understand its true value, he said, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to prove you've learned your lesson. Maya's vows made everyone laugh and cry. Who knew a matchmaking mix-up would lead to this? Though I'm still convinced Eleanor planned the whole thing. From her seat, Elena just smiled mysteriously. The reception was a beautiful blend of cultures and celebrations. James's tech team mingled with Maya's medical staff. Hospital administrators chatted with corporate executives. Children ran around, playing games and stealing extra desserts. Late in the evening, Maya and James found themselves back on their bench in Central Park, still in their wedding clothes. Full circle, Maya said, leaning against him. Though I hope that Thai place never gets too popular. I like having our secret spot. About that, James grinned. I bought the building. The owner can stay as long as she wants, rent-free. She promised to always keep our table ready. Maya laughed. Some things haven't changed. You're still extra. 3 months had passed since Maya and James's separation, and autumn was painting Central Park in brilliant shades of red and gold. Maya found herself walking through the park one Sunday morning, remembering their breakfast dates. The memory didn't hurt as much anymore. It had softened into something bittersweet. She stopped at their old bench, surprised to find Eleanor Zhang sitting there, feeding pigeons. I wondered when you'd come back here, Eleanor said, patting the space beside her. Maya sat down, wrapping her coat tighter against the morning chill. You've been waiting for me? Not exactly. But I know how healing works. I've been matching people for 20 years, remember? Sometimes you need to revisit the place where things began to figure out where they should go. Their conversation was interrupted by Maya's phone ringing, the hospital's emergency tone. A bus had overturned on the highway, and they needed all hands on deck. At the hospital, chaos reigned. Maya was deep in surgery when she heard nurses whispering about a special visitor. James had arrived with his entire tech team, bringing prototype medical devices that could help with the crisis. Hours later, after saving multiple lives, Maya found James in the hospital cafeteria, his sleeves rolled up, looking as exhausted as she felt. I heard about the accident on the news, he explained, offering her a cup of decent coffee. He'd apparently had his assistant make a coffee run to their old favorite shop. Thought our new scanning equipment might help. Maya accepted the coffee, too tired to maintain any barriers. It did. We saved 3 people we might have lost otherwise. They sat in comfortable silence, both remembering similar moments from before, sharing quiet hospital cafeteria meals after Maya's long surgeries. It felt familiar, yet different. I saw your press conference, Maya finally said. And the changes you've been making at your company. James nodded. I needed to do that for myself, not just for us. I had to understand why I let other people's fears affect me. I've been doing some thinking too, Maya admitted, about why I walked away. It wasn't just about your doubt, it was about my own fears of not being enough, of having to constantly prove myself. Just then, Maya's phone buzzed. A photo had gone viral. Someone had snapped a picture of them in the cafeteria. The comments were different this time. People were praising James's response to the crisis, sharing stories about Maya's surgical skills. Look at this, Maya showed him her phone, laughing softly. No conspiracy theories this time. Maybe people finally see what matters, James said. Not what we look like together, but what we can accomplish. Their moment was interrupted by a nurse rushing in. Another emergency required Maya's expertise. As she stood to leave, James caught her hand. Have dinner with me, he said. Not tonight. You need sleep. But soon, we can talk properly. Maya looked at their joined hands. I'm not the same person I was 3 months ago. Good, James replied. Neither am I. That evening, after all emergencies were handled, Maya found a message from Eleanor. Sometimes the best love stories need an intermission. It gives the characters time to grow into who they need to be for each other. Maya smiled, remembering how it all began with a matchmaking mistake. She thought about James, about how they'd both changed, about how sometimes you need to step away from something to see it clearly. She thought about the little girl who'd noticed her sad eyes, now fully recovered and asking when Dr. Thompson's smile would reach her eyes again. She thought about James bringing his entire tech team to help during a crisis, not for show, not for her, but because it was the right thing to do. Later that night, Maya sat in her apartment, looking at the city lights. Her phone lay on the coffee table, James's dinner invitation waiting for a response. She picked it up and typed, yes, but this time, let's meet as who we are now, not who we were then. His response came quickly. How about that Thai street food place I mentioned on our first night? No fancy restaurants, no expectations, just us. Maya smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Sometimes the best new beginnings start exactly where you left off, but with the wisdom that comes from taking the longer road back to each other. As she drove home through the rainy streets of New York, Maya realized that sometimes love isn't just about the feelings between two people. Sometimes it's about the journey they take to become better versions of themselves, even if they have to do that part alone. The saying goes that absence makes the heart grow fonder, but for Maya, the weeks following her break with James were filled with a different kind of growth, self-reflection. She threw herself into her work, performing back-to-back surgeries and spending extra hours with her young patients. One evening, while checking on a 6-year-old recovering from brain surgery, the little girl grabbed Maya's hand. "Dr. Thompson, why do you look sad?" Maya sat on the edge of the hospital bed, surprised by the child's perception. "What makes you think I'm sad, sweetie?" "You smile with your mouth, but not your eyes anymore," the girl said with the simple wisdom only children possess. That conversation stuck with Maya as she drove home that night. Her apartment felt emptier than before, even though nothing had changed. She missed James, their late-night conversations, the way he'd send her favorite coffee to the hospital during long shifts, how he'd listen intently when she explained complicated medical procedures. Meanwhile, James was making changes that surprised everyone in his circle. He started by reorganizing his company's board, bringing in diverse voices and perspectives. He established a foundation for minority medical students, though he was careful not to name it after Maya or mention her in any way. One day, Eleanor Zhang from Elite Connections appeared at his office unannounced. "You're making waves," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "Good ones." James looked up from his computer. "I'm trying to fix what I broke." "Are you fixing it for her or for yourself?" Eleanor asked pointedly. The question made James pause. "Both, I suppose." "I needed to understand why I let other people's prejudices affect me, even slightly. I grew up fighting against stereotypes myself, yet I still—" "We all have blind spots," Eleanor said gently. "The question is what we do once we see them." While James was rebuilding his corporate culture, Maya faced her own challenges. Her parents, who had been initially worried about her dating James, now defended her fiercely against the lingering rumors. "You know what hurts the most?" Maya confided in her mother during a Sunday dinner. "I spent my whole life proving myself. Perfect grades, medical school, becoming the youngest department head. And still, one person with a grudge can make people question everything about me." Her mother put down her cooking spoon and took Maya's hands. "Baby, that's exactly why you needed to step back. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you deserve someone who never questions your worth." The conversation with her mother helped Maya understand something crucial. Her decision to walk away wasn't just about James's moment of doubt. It was about her own need to be certain of herself in any relationship. One rainy evening, Maya was leaving the hospital when she noticed a familiar figure standing by her car. It was Victoria, James's ex-fiancée, looking considerably less polished than in her social media photos. Maya's first instinct was to walk away, but something made her stop. "What do you want?" Victoria looked uncomfortable. "To apologize." "Those photos?" "I was angry at James for moving on, for finding something real when what we had was so fake. I never meant to hurt you." Maya studied the woman before her. "You know what's funny? Those fake photos didn't hurt me nearly as much as the fact that some people were so ready to believe them." "I'm going public with the truth," Victoria said. "Admitting everything. James didn't ask me to. He doesn't even know I'm here." After Victoria left, Maya sat in her car for a long time, thinking. The rain pattered against the windshield, creating a gentle rhythm that matched her contemplative mood. She pulled out her phone and found herself looking at old photos of her and James. There they were, laughing over croissants in the park, both still in their work clothes, neither caring about appearances. That had been real. The doubt, the fear, the prejudice, that had been learned behavior, social conditioning they'd both been fighting against their whole lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Turn on the news." James was giving a press conference, not about his company, but about the recent events. He spoke about growing up Asian American, about internalized prejudices, about the need for change in corporate culture. He never mentioned Maya by name, but his message was clear. He'd learned from his mistakes, and he was working to be better. "I spent my life proving stereotypes wrong," he said to the cameras, "but I still let them affect my judgment when it mattered most. That stops now." Maya watched the broadcast, tears rolling down her cheeks. This wasn't just a grand gesture to win her back. This was James doing the work, understanding why things had gone wrong, and trying to create real change. The following weeks tested James and Maya's relationship in ways they hadn't imagined. After James's public statement supporting Maya went viral, someone from his past decided to stir up trouble. His ex-fiancée Victoria emerged with what appeared to be damaging information about Maya. One morning, as Maya was preparing for surgery, her phone exploded with notifications. Victoria had released photos that seemed to show Maya in compromising situations, at gambling establishments, leaving hotels with different men, even what appeared to be security footage of a shoplifting incident. "These are fake," Maya said it immediately when James called her. She was sitting in the hospital's break room, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the images. "James, I've never even been to Las Vegas." "I know," James replied, but there was a slight hesitation in his voice that made Maya's heart sink. "My security team is analyzing the photos right now." The photos spread like wildfire across social media. Maya's colleagues started giving her sideways glances in the hospital corridors. Parents of her young patients requested different doctors. The hospital board called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. James's company board members saw an opportunity. They called an urgent meeting, expressing concerns about the company's image. "The stock has dropped 15% since your relationship went public," one board member pointed out. "These new allegations, they're troubling." "They're lies," James said firmly, but doubt had started creeping in. Not about Maya's character, he knew her heart, but about how much damage this could do to both their careers. That evening, Maya discovered something even more disturbing. A private investigator had been following her, taking photos of her everyday activities. She found out when she noticed the same car parked outside her apartment 3 days in a row. She called James, who was in the middle of damage control meetings. "Someone's watching me," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Did you hire them?" "What?" "No, of course not," James responded, but then fell silent for a moment. "But I think I know who did." It turned out James's family, specifically his uncle who sat on the company board, had hired the PI to protect the family interests. They wanted to make sure Maya wasn't hiding anything that could damage their reputation further. Maya felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "Your family is investigating me. After everything we've been through?" "I didn't know," James said desperately. "I'll put a stop to it right now." But the damage was done. Maya remembered how James had hesitated, just slightly, when the fake photos first appeared. How he'd let his security team investigate instead of trusting her word completely. "I need some time," Maya said quietly. "This isn't about the photos or the PI. It's about trust. You let them make you doubt me, even for a second." "Maya, please," James began, but she cut him off. "I've worked too hard to have my character questioned like this. By anyone. Even you." Her voice broke slightly. "I love you, James, but I love myself more." She ended the call and turned off her phone. That night, she cried in Lisa's arms, mourning not just the relationship, but the dream of being accepted for who she was, not what she represented. James spent the night pacing his penthouse, realizing how he'd unconsciously allowed others' prejudices to seep into his mind. He'd thought he was above such things, but when pressure came from all sides, family, business, society, he'd let doubt creep in. The next morning, he made a decision. He called an emergency board meeting, but this time he wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to clean house. My uncle's actions in hiring a private investigator were unethical and possibly illegal, he announced to the stunned board. He's resigned, effective immediately. Anyone else who has a problem with who I choose to love can follow him out the door. He then went to his family home, where his relatives had gathered to discuss the situation. Instead of the usual peaceful family dinner, he confronted decades of ingrained prejudice head-on. "I've let you influence my choices my entire life," he told them. "But not this time. Maya Thompson is the most brilliant, compassionate person I've ever met. If you can't see past your own biases to recognize that, then you're the ones losing out." But winning Maya back wouldn't be as simple as making speeches. Trust, once damaged, takes time to rebuild. And Maya had her own journey to complete. learning to believe that she could be loved for exactly who she was, without compromise or apology. As James sat in his empty penthouse that night, looking at a photo of Maya laughing in Central Park, he realized that sometimes the biggest obstacles to love aren't the external pressures, they're the internal ones we carry without even knowing it. The following weeks tested James and Maya's relationship in ways they hadn't imagined. After James's public statement supporting Maya went viral, someone from his past decided to stir up trouble. His ex-fiancée Victoria emerged with what appeared to be damaging information about Maya. One morning, as Maya was preparing for surgery, her phone exploded with notifications. Victoria had released photos that seemed to show Maya in compromising situations, at gambling establishments, leaving hotels with different men, even what appeared to be security footage of a shoplifting incident. "These are fake," Maya said immediately when James called her. She was sitting in the hospital's break room, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the images. "James, I've never even been to Las Vegas." "I know," James replied, but there was a slight hesitation in his voice that made Maya's heart sink. "My security team is analyzing the photos right now." The photos spread like wildfire across social media. Maya's colleagues started giving her sideways glances in the hospital corridors. Parents of her young patients requested different doctors. The hospital board called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. James's company board members saw an opportunity. They called an urgent meeting, expressing concerns about the company's image. "The stock has dropped 15% since your relationship went public," one board member pointed out. "These new allegations, they're troubling." "They're lies," James said firmly, but doubt had started creeping in. Not about Maya's character, he knew her heart, but about how much damage this could do to both their careers. That evening, Maya discovered something even more disturbing. A private investigator had been following her, taking photos of her everyday activities. She found out when she noticed the same car parked outside her apartment 3 days in a row. She called James, who was in the middle of damage control meetings. "Someone's watching me," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Did you hire them?" "What?" "No, of course not," James responded, but then fell silent for a moment. "But I think I know who did." It turned out James's family, specifically his uncle who sat on the company board, had hired the PI to protect the family interests. They wanted to make sure Maya wasn't hiding anything that could damage their reputation further. Maya felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "Your family is investigating me. After everything we've been through?" "I didn't know," James said desperately. "I'll put a stop to it right now." But the damage was done. Maya remembered how James had hesitated, just slightly, when the fake photos first appeared. How he'd let his security team investigate instead of trusting her word completely. "I need some time," Maya said quietly. "This isn't about the photos or the PI. It's about trust. You let them make you doubt me, even for a second." "Maya, please," James began, but she cut him off. "I've worked too hard to have my character questioned like this. By anyone. Even you." Her voice broke slightly. "I love you, James, but I love myself more." She ended the call and turned off her phone. That night, she cried in Lisa's arms, mourning not just the relationship, but the dream of being accepted for who she was, not what she represented. James spent the night pacing his penthouse, realizing how he'd unconsciously allowed others' prejudices to seep into his mind. He'd thought he was above such things, but when pressure came from all sides, family, business, society, he'd let doubt creep in. The next morning, he made a decision. He called an emergency board meeting, but this time he wasn't there to defend himself. He was there to clean house. My uncle's actions in hiring a private investigator were unethical and possibly illegal, he announced to the stunned board. He's resigned, effective immediately. Anyone else who has a problem with who I choose to love can follow him out the door. He then went to his family home, where his relatives had gathered to discuss the situation. Instead of the usual peaceful family dinner, he confronted decades of ingrained prejudice head-on. "I've let you influence my choices my entire life," he told them. "But not this time. Maya Thompson is the most brilliant, compassionate person I've ever met. If you can't see past your own biases to recognize that, then you're the ones losing out." But winning Maya back wouldn't be as simple as making speeches. Trust, once damaged, takes time to rebuild. and Maya had her own journey to complete, learning to believe that she could be loved for exactly who she was, without compromise or apology. As James sat in his empty penthouse that night, looking at a photo of Maya laughing in Central Park, he realized that sometimes the biggest obstacles to love aren't the external pressures, they're the internal ones we carry without even knowing it. James took her hand, his grip firm and sure. "Then we'll face it together. I'm not letting other people's prejudices dictate my life anymore." He pulled out his phone and started typing. Maya leaned over to look. "What are you doing?" "Writing a statement, setting the record straight." He showed her the draft. A powerful declaration about love, prejudice, and the right to choose one's own path. Maya read it, tears welling in her eyes. "You'll face backlash." "Good," James said, pulling her close. "Maybe it's time someone in my position took a stand. Besides, do you know how rare it is to find someone who can debate neural pathway mapping over breakfast?" Maya laughed through her tears. "We're really doing this. Taking on your conservative board, my worried family, and apparently half the internet." James kissed her forehead softly. "We are. Though maybe next time we should eat breakfast somewhere less public." Outside, the city lights twinkled as night fell. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more headlines, more family drama, more prejudice to fight. But for now, they had each other, and sometimes that's all you need to face the world. The morning the photos hit social media, Maya was in the middle of a delicate surgery when her phone started buzzing nonstop in her locker. By the time she emerged from the operating room 6 hours later, she had missed calls from her parents, 3 siblings, and what seemed like every friend she'd ever made. "Dr. Thompson." A nurse called out as Maya walked down the hospital corridor. "There are reporters in the lobby asking about you." Maya's stomach dropped as she pulled up the news on her phone. There they were, photos of her and James in Central Park, looking sleepy and happy. The headlines ranged from curious to cruel: "Tech billionaire's mystery woman revealed," and "James Chen spotted with unknown doctor," to more pointed ones like "Chen family legacy at risk." Meanwhile, James was dealing with his own storm. His family's WeChat group was exploding with messages, his aunt leading the charge of concern and disapproval. In the middle of a crucial investor meeting, his phone lit up with a call from his mother. James, his mother's voice was tense when he finally called her back. "Why did I have to find out about this girl from the internet?" "Your aunt is very upset about Alice Wong." "Mom," James rubbed his temples, "I'm 32 years old. I can date whoever I want." "Of course you can," she said in that tone mothers perfect for expressing disappointment. "But you have responsibilities. Your position, our family name." The day got worse when James's PR team informed him that some social media users were spreading ugly rumors about Maya, questioning her credentials and suggesting she was after his money. That evening, they met at James's penthouse, away from prying eyes. Maya looked exhausted, still in her scrubs because she hadn't dared go home where reporters were camping out. "My mother called," she said, accepting the glass of wine James offered. "She's worried about me. Says she's seen this story before. Successful black women being used as publicity stunts by wealthy men." James sat beside her on his leather couch, their shoulders touching. "My mother's worried too. Different reasons, same concern." "Is this too complicated?" Maya asked quietly. "We've only known each other a few weeks. Maybe it's not worth—" "Don't," James interrupted, turning to face her. "Don't let them make us doubt this. Whatever this is, it's real." Maya smiled weakly. "Easy to say, but your board members are probably having fits. I saw the company stock drop 2 points today." "Let it drop," James said firmly. "I built that company from nothing. They need me more than I need them." Just then, James's phone rang again. It was Eleanor Zhang from Elite Connections. They put her on speaker. "I suppose I owe you both an explanation," Eleanor said. "The mix-up at the restaurant, it wasn't exactly an accident." Maya sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I've been matching couples for 20 years, Eleanor explained. Sometimes the perfect match isn't the one that looks good on paper. James, when your aunt asked me to find you someone, I saw a man who needed someone who wouldn't be impressed by his wealth. And Maya, when I heard about you from your colleague, I saw someone who needed an equal, not just another doctor." "So you played matchmaker without telling us?" James asked, amused despite himself. I took a chance, Eleanor admitted. And from those photos today, it seems I wasn't wrong. After the call ended, Maya and James sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, Maya spoke. You know what's funny? If we'd known who we were meeting that night, we probably would have both found excuses to cancel. James laughed. Definitely. I was so tired of arranged meetings with suitable women. And I was done with being set up with doctors who only wanted to talk about their own brilliance, Maya added. Their moment was interrupted by James's phone buzzing with an alert. Someone had dug up photos of Maya at a Black Lives Matter protest 3 years ago, and conservative news outlets were starting to run stories questioning her political agenda. Maya's face fell as she read the headlines. James, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Your investors, your family, they ended up sitting on a bench in Central Park, watching the sunrise while sharing pastries. Maya had pulled her surgical cap off, but curls wild and untamed, still in her scrubs. James had loosened his tie, his usual perfectionism forgotten as they talked about everything and nothing. You know, Maya said, licking butter from her fingers in a way that made James's heart skip, most guys try to impress dates with fancy restaurants and expensive gifts. Would you prefer that? James asked, genuinely curious. Maya shook her head. This is perfect. Real. Though I have to ask, how did you know I was working overnight? James looked slightly embarrassed. I might have bribed Lisa with promises of funding for her research program. Maya laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Sneaky, but you should know Lisa would have told you my schedule for free. She's been trying to set me up with every doctor in the hospital for years. As the morning joggers started filling the park, they reluctantly prepared to part ways. Maya had to get some sleep before her next shift, and James had a board meeting in a few hours. This was nice, Maya said, standing up and stretching. Very nice. James watched her, memorizing the way the morning light caught her face. We could do it again, maybe at a more reasonable hour, when you're not wearing scrubs and I'm not in yesterday's suit. Maya pretended to think about it. I don't know, the scrubs and wrinkled suit combo has a certain charm. But before they could make plans, Maya's phone buzzed with a hospital emergency. A moment later, James's phone lit up with messages about a crisis at his company. Duty calls, they said simultaneously, then laughed at the coincidence. As they hurried off in opposite directions, neither noticed the paparazzi photographer hiding behind a tree, capturing their morning together. The photos would hit the internet later that day, sparking a frenzy of speculation about the mysterious woman who had captured New York's most eligible bachelor's attention. Their peaceful bubble was about to burst, but for that brief morning, they were just two people sharing coffee and croissants, falling in love in the most natural way possible by being completely themselves. The morning after their unexpected dinner, Maya woke up to a text message that made her smile. James had sent a photo of the Elite Connections business card with a simple message, "Best mistake ever." She found herself staring at her phone longer than usual before responding with a coffee cup emoji and definitely in my top 5 dining mishaps. Over the next few days, they fell into an easy pattern of texting. James discovered that Maya's schedule as a neurosurgeon was even more demanding than his CEO commitments. She'd send him messages at odd hours between surgeries, sometimes sharing the triumph of saving a child's life, other times seeking distraction after a particularly difficult case. One evening, while Maya was catching up on patient charts, her best friend and fellow surgeon Lisa dropped by her office with takeout. Okay, spill it, Lisa said, pulling up a chair. You've been smiling at your phone all week. Who is he? Maya tried to play it cool, but her face gave her away. Remember that dinner meeting you thought was so important I had to rush out of surgery for? The one with the brilliant but probably boring old researcher. What about it? Well, Maya said, putting down her pen, turns out there was a mix-up. Instead of Dr. Harrison, I ended up having dinner with someone else entirely. Lisa's eyes widened as Maya recounted the evening. Hold up, James Chen. As in Chen Technologies' James Chen, the guy who's worth more than some small countries. Maya rolled her eyes. He's just James. You know how when you meet someone and the conversation just flows? It was like that. Girl, I've seen you shut down billionaires at hospital fundraisers without blinking. What's different about this one? Maya thought about it while picking at her noodles. He asked about my latest research paper, not just to be polite. He'd actually read it. We spent 20 minutes debating the ethics of neural implants. How many people can you do that with over Wagyu beef? Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, James was having a similar conversation with his closest friend and company COO, David. You know your aunt is going to lose it when she finds out you stood up Alice Wong, David said, lounging on James's office couch. James didn't look up from his laptop. Technically, I didn't stand her up. I was at the restaurant, just with someone else. Yeah, about that, I looked her up. Dr. Maya Thompson, youngest head of pediatric neurosurgery at Mount Sinai. Published in every major medical journal. Impressive. Don't do that, James said, finally closing his laptop. The background check thing, she's not a potential acquisition. David raised his hands in surrender. Force of habit. But you have to admit it's unexpected. Your family has been trying to set you up with every eligible Asian socialite on the East Coast. Maybe that's the problem, James replied, standing to look out at the city lights. Everyone in my life trying to plan everything. For once, something unplanned feels right. Their second date happened spontaneously. Maya was leaving the hospital after a long shift when she got a text from James. Look up. There he was, leaning against his car with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag. I remember you mentioning you love those croissants from that little place in Brooklyn, he said, handing her a coffee. Thought you might need breakfast after saving lives all night. Standing outside in the cool night air, there was a moment of hesitation, the kind of pause filled with possibility. This was unexpectedly wonderful, Maya said, wrapping her light jacket around herself. It was, James agreed, then added with a smile, I should probably send that matchmaking agency a thank you note for their mistake. Maya laughed, but then grew thoughtful. You know, I've never believed in coincidences like this. My grandmother would say some things are just meant to happen. Would your grandmother approve of you having dinner with a stranger due to a scheduling mix-up? James asked, his eyes twinkling. Probably not, Maya admitted. But she always said life's best moments come when you least expect them. As they exchanged numbers, both slightly nervous like teenagers after a first date, neither realized they were being watched. Inside the restaurant, Eleno Zhang, owner of Elite Connections, smiled satisfactorily as she watched through the window. The mix-up had been entirely intentional. After 20 years in the matchmaking business, she'd learned that sometimes the best matches were the ones people never saw coming. That night, as Maya took a cab back to her apartment and James's driver navigated through late-night traffic, both felt something they hadn't expected, a sense of possibility of beginning. Neither could have guessed how their lives would intertwine or the challenges they would face. But sometimes the best love stories start with a simple mistake, or perhaps, as Maya's grandmother would say, with destiny disguised as coincidence. Through an unexpected twist of fate at Elite Connections, one of New York's most exclusive matchmaking services, tech billionaire James Chen found himself walking into Le Bernardin on a crisp autumn evening. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and confident stride masked his slight irritation at having to participate in what he considered an old-fashioned approach to dating. His aunt had insisted he meet the daughter of her close friend, another successful Asian American family, and he'd reluctantly agreed just to keep peace during the upcoming holidays. At the same time, Dr. Maya Thompson was rushing through Manhattan traffic, her surgical scrubs hastily exchanged for an elegant black dress she kept in her office for emergency formal occasions. She barely had time to refresh her makeup after a grueling 12-hour surgery. Her colleague had set up this dinner, insisting she meet a fellow neurosurgeon who was doing groundbreaking research in her field. The maitre d' led James to a quiet corner table with a spectacular view of the city lights. He checked his watch, 7:58 p.m. At least his date was punctual when, right on time, a striking woman in a black dress approached the table. James stood, expecting to see Alice Wong, his aunt's friend's daughter. Instead, he found himself looking into the warm brown eyes of someone entirely different. Maya paused, her professional smile faltering slightly as she took in the stranger before her. This definitely wasn't Dr. Harrison, the 60-something researcher she'd expected to meet. The maitre d' confirmed the reservation name, and both James and Maya sat down, confusion evident on their faces. I'm sorry, but I think there's been a mix-up, They both said almost simultaneously, then laughed, breaking the tension. Over the next few minutes, as they sorted through the confusion, they discovered the matchmaking agency had somehow crossed their appointments with other clients. Maya explained she wasn't even a member of the service, she'd simply been set up for a professional dinner. James admitted to being strong-armed into matchmaking by his well-meaning but interfering family. Instead of awkwardly ending the evening, something made them pause. Maybe it was the way Maya's eyes crinkled when she laughed at the absurdity of the situation, or how James dropped his polished CEO persona and admitted he'd rather be trying out that new Thai street food place downtown. "Well," Maya said, picking up her menu with a mischievous smile, "since we're both here, and this is supposedly one of the best restaurants in the city, would you like to enjoy an accidentally excellent dinner?" James found himself relaxing for the first time in weeks. "I'd like that very much. Though I should warn you, I have strong opinions about wine pairings." "Perfect, because I have absolutely no idea about wines." "I'm more of a whatever's open kind of person," Maya replied, making James laugh genuinely. As their conversation flowed, they discovered unexpected connections. Maya's work in pediatric neurosurgery fascinated James, who shared stories about his company's development of medical imaging technology. She was refreshingly unimpressed by his wealth, more interested in debating the ethical implications of AI in healthcare. They talked about growing up as first-generation Americans, Maya's parents from Nigeria, James's from China, and the unique pressures they'd both faced. They shared stories about their ambitious mothers, strict fathers, and the weight of cultural expectations. When Maya described sneaking out to dance classes instead of the MCAT prep courses her parents had enrolled her in, James countered with tales of coding games under his desk during Chinese school. The evening flew by, their food getting cold as they lost themselves in conversation. Neither checked their phones, a rarity for both of them. The restaurant staff began subtle hints about closing time, and they realized they'd been talking for nearly 3 hours.